Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session on grant writing. My name is Professor Puleng Sakalo, and I'm going to be with you for the next 2 hours talking about the importance of grant writing and what it means for us to think seriously about writing grants to support our research endeavors. This is a 3-part session. So we're going to have the first session today, the second session on Wednesday, and the last session on Friday. So we're going to cover one aspect today, and then we're going to be continuing with other aspects of grant writing and different aspects and different parts of grant writing as the week goes. So I'm going to share my presentation, and then we can get on with the session for today. Okay, so let's do presentation. All right, so as I said, we're going to be looking at grant writing, and today will be the first session. So why is it important for us to think about applying for grants? When you are a postgraduate student, when you are busy with your master's or your PhD, one of the things you need to think about is funding for your project. So it might not be huge funding that you require, but we believe that these are the skills that are going to be critical for you as you think about taking this project that you're doing now for your postgraduate studies, further building on it, or even working on other different projects, especially if you're interested in remaining in academia. It is going to be important for you to attract funding so that you can be able to have your own funding to be able to work on various projects that you may be interested in. So if you're not in academia, maybe you're working for an NGO or an NPO, again, the different kinds of spaces that you might be in outside of academia might also in some ways require you to source some funding. And we're hoping that with these sessions, you'll start thinking about ways in which you can apply for funding, but not only just apply for funding, but making sure that you write a winning grant, a grant that ensures that your chances of getting funding are high. All right. So what does it mean to develop a successful research project grant proposal? And you will see throughout this week as we are having these conversations that much of the proposal and the content of the proposal will be very much similar to how you're writing your own research proposal for your master's or your PhD. But then obviously there are some different nuances in terms of the focus and how you structure it. You'll remember when we were doing our sessions on writing for publication, again, we were talking about how to structure a paper in a way that it can be accepted in a journal, but how you write it is very different from how you would have written your thesis or your master's dissertation. So the same here again as well. The proposal is all about trying to ensure that the message that you're putting across, the narrative, the rationale, the question that you want to answer, all of those things come up very clear for the person who's going to be reviewing your proposal, for the funder who's going to entrust their funding, their money to you to be able to work on a project that aims at responding to a particular societal challenge, responding to a question that may assist us to have a better understanding of a particular phenomena. Okay, so what are grant announcements? Grant announcements are calls, are notifications that let the public, that let you and I know about grant funding that is available for a specific program competition. And here we call it a competition because you will be applying, 100 other people will be applying, 500 other people will be applying. So what is it that is going to make your application stand out? So with the grant announcement, you get to immediately know that there is funding that is available for particular area, particular focus of work, and it might be something that is in line with your own work. So you can start already thinking about putting together a proposal to be able to submit so that you may get funding. Okay. Sometimes it's called invitation to applicants. So there's a call or an invitation that's sent out and say all those who are interested in work around climate change, right, should apply for this funding. But they usually then go on to even explain further what about climate change the funding is interested in, right? So you need to understand what the funding is for and whether it's in line with your own interest, your own project, so that it does not get rejected from the onset. Okay, so that's what grant announcements are. So these can be found online when you Google. If you have a project that you've been thinking about and you're trying to find a potential funder, you can look online and check what funding is there that is available. You can check with your research office at the university what funding is there that you can apply for. So if you go online, so what we provide here is just some examples of the location of some of the announcements, right? And with these, then you can be able to check and get more information, more detail on what the funding is about, on what the funders require. So when you go to these, and you can have a look at them when you have access to these slides, you can go and check some of these funding calls and see what is it that the funders are looking for if you are interested in applying for funding. Okay, and fundings go hand in hand with priorities. So there are a lot of philanthropists that are out there. We have the Bill and Melinda Gates, we have the Oppenheimer, we have the Fulbright, we have Motsepe Foundation. So there are many funders that are looking into providing or making sure that there is funding available for particular projects, for particular research. So often the funder has got their own interest, they've got their own priorities, and it's based on those priorities that they then make funding available. So what are these priorities used for? Right, so in the previous slide, you saw the list of places and possible funding that are there. But for you to be able to say this one is linked to what I'm interested to, this one not so much, some aspects of this, but not everything. So maybe I should not apply because I do not meet all the criteria. So funding priorities are there to be able to assist you with that so that you do not waste your time, but you also do not waste the funder's time. So they are there to communicate the required content focus of an application. Is your work focusing on issues of gender justice and sexuality? Maybe this is what this funder's priority is. Is your work looking at environmental issues and climate change? This is what the priority of this particular funder is, right? Is your work looking at issues around economy and economic collapse and issues around that? If that's your work, it's in line with the priorities of the funder, that's something that you can consider, right? So what the priorities do, they narrow down the focus of what the funding can be for, but they also narrow down the focus of what the funders themselves can fund. So they give a priority or identify the department or organization interest in a specific issue. So if a funder is interested in issues around technological advancement, so that's what their issue is. So they're interested in anything related to technology. So you and I might be working on issues of technology, not necessarily focusing on the same issue around technology, but because our work, both of our work is around technology, then both of us can apply for that funding, right? So it can be narrow in terms of the theme, right? So it's issues around technology and technology advancement. But then it can also be a bit broad within that technology advancement. They usually give a list of subcategories that this is what we mean, or these are the things that we will consider that focus on issues around technological advancement. Okay. And also context also plays a role, and the target population. So it might be technological advancement, but technological advancement where, in which areas, in which part of the world. So if you are maybe based in the global north, the funding can be specific and say we're interested in focusing on technological advancement and the kind of work that's been done in that area, or that can be done, the possibilities that are there in the global south. Right. So obviously then it already then tells you you're not just going to be doing work on technological advancement, but you'll be doing work on technological advancement, specifically focusing on the so-called global south. All right. So that way then again, it gives it more focus. And then it already then again kind of directs you as the researcher in terms of not only just the topic itself, but the context related to that topic also becomes very important. And another interesting thing about funders and funding and grants is that the priorities can change and the priorities can shift, right? So priorities can also, if maybe looking in the African context or South African context, what are the priorities of South Africa? What are the priorities of the government? What is it that we want to achieve in the next 3 years or 5 years? And then based on those priorities, that's where funding would go. But it does not mean that in the next 3 years, those priorities would still be the same, right? So you need to look and understand and know what the priorities are currently in this moment, and think, and why are these priorities right now? And so when you think about the kind of work that you can do and how it's going to respond to those priorities, you're also then in line with the current issues that are happening in the world or in your own context. Okay, and then there's also the selection criteria, which is very important. Remember at the beginning, I said, when you are applying for a grant, it's you against 100 other people. It's you against 1,000 other people. So the reviewers are very much interested in looking at whether your work is in line with the priorities, as I've said, but it's also in line with the criteria that they have put in place for themselves to make it easier to be able to evaluate, right? So the selection criteria is there as part of the call. So when you get the call, when you look at the call, one of the things that you need to look closely at is to look at the selection criteria. It's there and it's important for you as the applicant, as well as the reviewer, So if you know what the selection criteria is, then you know what the reviewers are going to be using to score your application, but to also determine whether your application is good enough or not, it's in line with what they're looking for or not. So make sure that you look at the selection criteria, because it will help you to design and shape your project in line with the criteria that is going to be used. Right? Peer reviewers, again, as I've said, they use this to score and evaluate the quality of applications that they receive. So some of the applications are rejected, they are desk rejected. Some of the applications are rejected immediately without even going for review, because with the selection criteria, again, there's a tick box that you need to tick, and if all those things are not in place, then immediately that gets thrown out, because if they receive 1,000 applications, they tend to be very strict, because they're not going to be wasting their time looking at an application, the applicant of which did not spend enough time in ensuring that their application meets the required criterion. Okay, so that is very, very important. Selection criteria and making sure that you meet the criteria of the funder. Okay, and then parts or components of the selection criteria. What is it that is included in the selection criteria that you need to think about when you put together your application? First is the quality of the project design. Think about your own proposal, research proposal. You know that when you've written your proposal, it's got all these different elements, right? You've got the introduction, are your aims and objectives in place, the literature, have you identified what the gaps are, the methodology, all of those aspects, right? So that's how you design your research. Are the objectives in line with the theory, in line with the methods that you're going to be using? Everything has to speak to each other. And here the same as well, when you're applying for funding, you need to think about the quality of the project design, right? The excellence of how well the project has been developed. So you need to convince the reviewer, you need to convince the funder that if they give you R1 million, or if they give you $1 million, and you can calculate how much that is, if they entrust you with $1 million, is this project viable? So if they give you $1 million over a period of 3 years or over a period of 5 years, you need to be able to indicate and to show what is it that you're going to be doing in each and every year of the project. It has to be very clear, right? So that's how then the project design comes about. And it's not just putting together a proposal, but it's also the quality of that proposal. It has to be well thought out, and it also has to be well researched. What have others done? So again here, literature becomes very important. And if there's already, maybe you want to develop something that is tangible, what is it that's out there in society, that's out there in the community, that's out there in the world, that already exists, that you want to improve, that you want to do differently? So how is this new way of doing things going to add value to the world, going to bring about change to the world? And you'll see here the quality of the project design is central, very important. And as a result, it then carries much of the points that are given to a proposal when it's submitted for review. So when the reviewers are looking at your proposal, they will rank it. And for the project design, you're looking at between 30 and 50% of the 100% that you need to get for your project. Right, so you need to aim to get to 50 or close to 50 as much as possible. And then the quality of the project evaluation, again, this is going to be dependent on the kind of project that you're doing, the outcomes that you're hoping for, and how are you going to ensure that whatever it is that you've come up with actually works. So often with grants, it's unlike with your academic research proposal or research project, where it's ideal and it's wonderful for you to come up with an implementable framework on something, a model on something, and come up with recommendations of what can be put in place. Often with a grant, you actually need to think about the output beyond just giving recommendations, but actually providing an output that's going to, or that can be used, that can actually lead to the reformulation of policy, or that can lead to the building or advancement or development of a particular protocol, right? A tangible output that we can have. And then you need to indicate in your proposal how you're going to evaluate that, how you're going to evaluate this output that you've gotten. So it's not just enough to say, okay, this is what I hope to do, and I will give recommendations. You need to think beyond that. You need to say at the end, this is what we need to have, that there will be a book that's going to come out, and this book will be possibly be prescribed for schools in thinking about how we can reimagine issues of sexuality. The output that will come is that university will start rethinking and actually having unisex toilets, for example. So you see the kind of output that you would need to think about, right? And also how then are you going to evaluate the success of the outcome that you've come up with. So the quality of the evaluation that will be conducted of the proposed project. So at the end of your project, how are you going to evaluate to then be able to say, okay, this is what we managed to find. All right, so this is over and above the research outputs that will also hopefully come from your research, your project. All right, and also, and again, you'll see that with the evaluation, it also carries a lot of points in terms of ranking. And then, is there a need for the project? Again, going back to that question, why should we care? Why is it important for us to ask this question, right? So you have identified an issue, you have identified a problem, you have identified a gap, and now you have to explain and justify why is this project so important, so critical, that I, as the funder, for example, in this case, should give you $1 million for you to be able to spend time engaging with this problem and coming up with a solution, right? So what is the magnitude? What is the severity of the problem? Are you saying children are dying from malnutrition? How many children in the past 3 years? How many children in the past 5 years? Has the number been increasing? Has it not been increasing? What have been other processes that have been put in place? And what are their weaknesses? Why are they not working? So these are the questions that you need to be asking yourself and saying, while all these things have been done, we're still sitting with this problem. And this problem is an issue for society because no society wants to see its children, its next generation dying, right? So the issue of malnutrition then needs to be given attention. So the magnitude is a huge problem. Why is it a huge problem? Why is it a severe problem for any society? And in what way is this project that you're proposing, therefore, going to address this issue, right? So this is where now you justify the need for the project. Because anyone can just come up with a project and say that we can do this project, this is why it's important, but you need to be able to do that. So again, when the reviewers are looking at your grant proposal in the selection criteria, this is again what they're going to be looking at. That is their need for this project. So many people have been doing research on child malnutrition. So what angle, what new view, what new idea, what is it that you as the researcher are proposing, are hoping to achieve with this? So they will use that as a selection criteria. So you need to be able to then write a convincing justification for why this project is important and why this particular issue and focus is important for us to give attention to and to dedicate money to it. And then this is linked, of course, to the significance as well, the importance of the problem. So it's not just the problem itself, the need for it, but also its significance. Like I was saying, if we're talking about child malnutrition, why is it critical for us to pay attention to the issue of children in our communities, children in society, and the role that they play or they could play? What are some of the other factors that play a role in us looking at this particular issue, right? So the significance also is very important. Okay. So commonly used selection criteria continues. The quality of the management plan. How are you going to manage the project? If someone is going to give you $1 million, they want to be convinced that you're going to manage the project well, right? So the quality of the plan for managing the proposed project has to be very clear. How are you going to be managing this project? Are you linked to the university? Are you an independent researcher? What kind of support do you have in place? How are you going to move from one step to another? What processes do you have in place? Are these some of the things that you've thought about? Are you thinking about the possibility of working in collaboration with others? What are the implications of this? What would this mean? The collaborators, are they at the same institution, maybe different department, different discipline, or are they at other institutions, and how is that going to be managed, right? So it's not just the management of the funding or the funds, but also the management of the processes as well. So you need to be able to clearly indicate how things are going to be managed as part of this project. All right. And then the quality of the services to be provided by the proposed project. And again, here, depending on the focus, the theme, what your project is focusing on, what is it, the services that the project is going to offer, right? So, and also the quality of that, how is it going to make a difference, make a change? And who are you going to be working with? So the personnel. You have $1 million and you are going to be working with collaborators. So you might employ or give a contract to you might need a research assistant. Are you going to just need one, or are you going to need two? Are you going to need three, and why? Are you going to be working with collaborators, maybe from other institutions? How many collaborators, how many team members are you going to have? So is it going to consist of 3 people, 5 people, 8 people? And who are these people? What is their role going to be? So you're not just going to have people's names, but it has to be clear what role each and every person who's going to be part of the project is going to play, right? And also the quality of the personnel. Are you going to only work with emerging researchers? Are you going to work with a mix of established and emerging researchers? What is the background in terms of the work that they've already done? Do they already have some publications? Have they worked in this area before? So these are very important things to think about, that if you invite someone to be part of your project, you need to do this purposefully, right? You need to say, this is the reason why I'm inviting this person to be part of the project. This person comes in with statistical skills, because again, linking back to the research design at the beginning, or the project design. And remember, with the selection criteria, one thing again to really note, to note, all these points that I've been talking about up to this point, as it relates to selection criteria, they are all interconnected. So whatever you say under your management plan, it has to show and be in line with what appears in your research design. So if you are going to then choose people who are going to be the project personnel, you need to indicate what role they're going to play. So if you said you're going to be doing mixed methods, for example, in how you're going to collect data and you're going to do your research, you can say this particular colleague has got expertise in qualitative research. This one has got expertise in quantitative research. They've done this amount of work and this and that. They've got experience, they've supervised, they've worked in other similar projects before, so they come with this experience and knowledge. And so that's going to assist in ensuring that this project becomes a success. We're also providing an opportunity for research assistants to be part of the project, so that we contribute towards capacity building. We will also recruit 3 postgraduate students, maybe 2 masters, 1 PhD, or 2 PhD, 1 masters, so that at the end of the 3 years or at the end of the 5 years, we also have students who are going to have graduated as part of this project. So that way we're building capacity at multiple levels. So who is going to be involved and why? So if you are very specific and it's very clear what each and every step entails and how each and every step is connected to another, then it becomes easier for the reviewer to then be able to say that this project is very well thought out. I've been part of reviewing some of the big grant applications, and often it's very clear from how the proposal is written whether these colleagues have really applied themselves, but also whether there has been some process of consultation with those that they hope to work with, instead of just putting people's names and saying, if you are part of this, you can put it on your CV or put it on your performance appraisal that you are part of this project. And people sometimes just agree so that they can have something to say about being active researchers. And that comes across, it really comes across. If you're going to be working with people, make sure that you involve them. If you've got team members, you've got colleagues who are based at 3 other universities, get their input, work with them in putting together the proposal. You might be leading the project, but then the input is going to assist in ensuring that there's this unified voice, and it shows very clearly what role each and every person is going to play. Because otherwise, unfortunately, you will not be granted the funding that you may require. And for those who are in academia, or those who are interested in staying in academia and building careers in academia, it is becoming more and more important for academics to have their own external funding. While the university does provide some funding and support, but it's becoming more and more important for sustainability also of the university itself, but for research, but also as as a researcher to show that you can independently put together a research project that can be deemed worthy by someone externally to a point where they're confident to give you $1 million to manage a particular project. All right. And then the adequacy of resources. Have you thought about all the resources that you're going to require for your project? Again, this is an integral part of planning. It cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be something that you think about after. And each and every aspect of the project, you need to think about what resource are we going to require for this. So you need to demonstrate that resources are sufficient to carry out the project. If you're going to dedicate 30,000 to something that clearly would require at least 150,000, already at that point, as a reviewer, that's a red flag for me, because it already shows me that you have not thought out and have not done your homework. So do not thumbsuck when you're putting together a budget, right? So when you're talking about the resources, it's also linked to the budgeting. What is it that's going to be required? So if, for example, you're saying you're going to be hiring research assistants, and let's use UNISA as an example. So if you're going to be hiring 3 research assistants at UNISA, you cannot just decide that, okay, I will pay them 15,000 rand each. Because when the money comes, UNISA uses its own internal policies because the person is going to be linked to UNISA. And you may find that according to the policies on hiring research associates, there's a set standard in terms of payment that is in place. So you may find that you over budgeted or you under budgeted. So you said you would pay the person 15,000 rand, only to find that maybe according to the policy, you can only pay 7,500 rand. So where's the other half going to come from? So already that means there's a possibility of a shortfall. So doing your homework and ensuring the kind of resources that you're going to require means also just taking a walk or sending an email or making a phone call to the HR department and ask this information so that when you put together your budget, you are doing this from an informed position. If you're going to be requiring equipment for the lab, for the kinds of experiments that you're going to be doing, make sure that you do that homework. What's going to be required? Call the suppliers, relevant suppliers, get an indication of how much more or less the kind of equipment that you're going to require cost, and then use that to be able to assist you to work out the budget, but also just other resources. So human resources that you're going to require, but also financial resources. Will you have time? Do you qualify for a sabbatical, for example, if you want to go and spend 3 months in another country or another university? Is that something that is possible? So all of that needs to be very clear and very well articulated in the proposal. Okay, and when you do that, you increase your chances of getting that funding. So here, just visually, what I've just spoken about in terms of the selection criteria, just a snapshot for you to see. You'll see the project design is a huge chunk of the pie, right? And then the adequacy of resources, again, is a huge chunk of the pie. So it's very, very important for you to think very seriously about what is it that's required, but also in putting together the actual project and how it's going to be designed, how you're going to go about doing the work and making sure that everything is in place in that regard. Okay, so when you put together the application, how do you then organize everything? Right, we've just spoken about the criteria, what needs to be in place. How how do you then plan and put together an application in a way that ensures that you've seriously taken time and taken all the things that I've just spoken about into consideration? Time, time, and time. Do not think you can put together an application overnight just like that. So when you say approximately 25 to 40 hours, this is not including all the homework that you're going to do. It's not including that phone call or email that I said you should send to HR. So sitting and thinking about what you're going to do and sitting and looking at what is it that is required, all of that takes time, right? So as you can see, it's almost 2 full days, not necessarily consecutive. The nice thing about online applications, if it's online, is that you can always work on your application and then save it and come back to it and come back to it again. So that helps you to not feel rushed. Because if you're going to work on your application just a few days before the closing date, work that was not well thought out, that was rushed, you can see even in the reading of it. You may not necessarily get time to have the work proofread or edited, and that's going to show. And that contributes to clumsiness. Do you really want to lose funding because of grammatical errors? I don't think you want that. So if you are going to be applying for a grant, you have to make sure that you dedicate time to working on that grant and ensuring that you put together a winning grant. Read the application package in its entirety. So when you get that call or invite to apply, when you get information about a particular grant that you think you might want to apply for, make sure that you read. Do you even qualify for it? At face value, it might seem as if, oh, okay, this is something that is in line with my work. But as you sit and read and you look at the focus and the specific things that they require, you may realize that, oh, actually, no, because of this line, because of what they're saying here and what they're saying there, maybe this one is not for me. But you can only be able to do that if you've given yourself enough time to actually engage and study the application package itself. Read that application package in its entirety. Don't just browse or read some parts and not everything. That's how you miss out on important things. And most of the time, actually all the time, when the calls are out, there is all this information. The application package will have the contact details of someone that you may contact if you have any queries or any questions. I know sometimes we don't want to seem as if we don't know or understand things, but it's important, it's better to ask than not to ask and then do the wrong thing. So if you are uncertain about anything, make sure that you contact the contact person, competition manager, grants manager. That person is a dedicated individual who has got the knowledge of the ins and out of the project. So any questions that you may have and that they will be answering for you will assist you in strengthening the application that you have. So I would really recommend that if you do apply for funding at some point, make sure that you have read and make sure that if necessary, you contact the manager and ensure that you get all the information and the correct information before you hit that submit button. Okay. Again, so preparing your proposal, follow the suggested formatting lines. Again, you'll see some resemblance with our previous sessions when we're talking about writing for publication. What did we say? We say if you have decided on a particular journal, make sure that You read and understand the author guidelines, read and make sure that you understand the formatting requirements of the particular journal, because if you don't, then you risk being desk rejected by the journal. And you will see, therefore, that there's a common thread here in terms of the importance of reading, the importance of ensuring that you understand the requirements of whatever it is that you are interested in, that you want to submit something to or apply for. So again, even with the grant writing, sometimes when you receive a grant call, and this is to your benefit, even though sometimes it might feel like it's overwhelming. You may receive the call, and when you open it, hence I was saying you must read from beginning to end. When you open it, you may find that it's about 20 pages. 20 pages explaining what you need to do when it comes to the research design, what it is that you need to do when it comes to the budget, where they will explain that these things are not funded, these things are funded, and these things are funded but to a limit of this much. So that might already be a page or 2 or 3, just explaining all the budgetary issues related to applying for a grant. Now, if you don't read those 3 pages, chances are you're going to request for a budget line item that is actually not included or funded by the funder. And if you do that, immediately that's a red flag for me as a reviewer. Why are you asking for something that was stated very clearly in the application call that this is not funded? You want to attend 3 conferences each year, but in the call, in the guidelines, it's indicated that you can only go to 1 conference. And here you have budgeted for 3 conferences. Already that's a red flag. It says to me, did you not read what was required? So make sure that you follow the suggested formatting guidelines. How is the budget supposed to look? Can you do it just as a narrative? Do you just do it in a table format? Do they want it as an Excel spreadsheet? So how do they want it? Right? In each and every aspect of the application, how do they want it as well? Sometimes when it's online, and depending on the funder and the systems, online systems that they use, it might be easier because you'll find that they give space for each and every aspect, so it becomes easier. Then you know that here I'm going to put content here, click next, and then I put content there, click next, makes life easier. But there also, again, be careful of the cut and paste, because sometimes they give you maximum characters in terms of the length of each section. So if maybe you've written offline and now you're taking that page or that paragraph and you're pasting it onto the online application forum, make sure that you reread and make sure that everything is in place. Sometimes what we find is that when you read the content there online, you'll find that there's a sentence that just ends halfway. So already then that tells me this person did a cut and paste and then they did not proofread. So now I don't know what else you were still saying. And maybe that last aspect was where the actual heart or gist of what this section was about was, but now it's not there because it was cut because you had exceeded the allowed characters. Okay, so proofread, proofread, proofread. I cannot say this enough. It's very, very important. It's things like this that can seem to be technical, but can actually cost you a grant that you might be applying for. Okay, so structure your narrative according to the selection criteria. We spoke about the selection criteria. So when you look at the call, they will have a list of the selection criteria. We'll be looking at the strength of the design, we'll be looking at the budget, whether the budget is in line with the project. We'll be looking at the evaluation processes that the applicant has put in place. We'll be looking at this, we'll be looking at that. So if there isn't a set structure that has been given to you, use that as your structure. And that way it makes things easier, because it's almost as if you're automatically answering questions that were not necessarily asked, but you know that the selection criteria will be based on those questions, so you are answering them. And then it makes it easier also for the reviewer, because that's what they're going to be using when they rank your application. All right, so it makes it easier for the peer reviewers to evaluate your proposal. If there's a clear selection criteria there in place, use that to structure your proposal, your application. Okay. And then pay careful attention to the language that you use. Again, as in the past, we all have our different jargon that are discipline-based. When you are applying for funding, try and be clear, try and be concise, try and be specific. As they say, don't beat about the bush. Also, remember, you've got limited word count also here, because they'll say maximum 2 pages, explain your research design, maximum 2 pages, explain this and that, tell us about this, 1 page, tell us about this, 1 paragraph, not more than 400 words. So make sure that you, again, you are very careful how you use your words or your language. If something can be said in 1 word, don't use 5 words. You're already eating up space for other things that you could have said, right? So just be clear, be concise, don't explain something that does not require explaining. Be very specific. Usually proposals that are like that are very clear and concise, make such a beautiful read. And as a reviewer, and you read that, things are just so clear. You don't have to wonder and ask yourself, what does this person mean here? And remember, you're not going to be there for the reviewer to ask you, what is it that you mean here? What is it that you meant here? So make sure that you write in such a way that the reviewer is not going to be left with those questions that you unfortunately won't be able to answer, and as a result, not get the funding because there are questions that are left unanswered. Okay, I've already indicated justify your funding request according to the proposed project activities, and check all budget figures for accuracy. Keep in mind that costs must be both reasonable and necessary. So even if they have indicated, they've provided a list of things that will be funded as part of this grant, you don't necessarily have to now have 20 budget items, because there's a list that came with the call that showed 20 things that are funded. So if you only need 14, just go for those 14, and then you can have enough money to make sure that all these 14 things are catered for properly. So if it's not necessary for you to attend a conference, for example, don't add a conference just because they say they will pay for you to go to a conference. All right, so is it reasonable? If I look at the cost, if I look at the amount of money that you are asking, in line with the item that you're asking the money for, are they two going hand in hand? Right, so that has to be very, very important. And of course, as I've been saying throughout, make sure that you proofread your proposal. It's very, very important. Okay, and then submitting your proposal. Do not wait until the last minute to submit your application. If they say the closing date is the 31st of September, don't wait for the 31st of September. Make sure that you give yourself ample time to work on your application so that you're not rushed. Because if you know that, oh my gosh, the closing date is tomorrow, then you're going to be rushing. But also if the application is online, we all know about the online traffic and how sometimes things can hang or not go through, and then you are unable to upload or download things. So try and avoid all of that, so that even if there are some glitches, you still have time to try again tomorrow or to try again in the evening. You have time, you're not rushed, right? Know the specific deadline and date and time for e-applications. Remember, again, the time differences. So if you are applying and the funder is in Australia, know that we have a lot of hours when it comes to the time difference, right? When it's Tuesday today in South Africa, it's Wednesday in Australia. So when you are in New York, there's 7 hours. So when they say the closing date is 12 midnight South African time, then if you're in South Africa, you know what that means, you know. But if you are applying and you are based in the United States or you are based in Ghana, you know that there's time difference. You know that Ghana has got 2 hours, or South Africa has got 2 hours ahead of Ghana. So you need to account for that as well, because you will go and try to submit and only find that no, the system is now closed because you are waiting for 12 and only to find that no, your 12 is actually 10 somewhere else, or it's 2 somewhere else. So sometimes, depending on the time difference, who is ahead and who is behind, you might actually miss it. And that can only happen if you wait for the last minute. So do not wait for the last minute. If you don't, then even issues of time difference would not matter that much in terms of you missing the deadline. Okay. And if a competition does not require electronic submission, and you experience some technical issues in submitting an electronic, if it does require, my apologies, electronic submission, and when you try to submit online, you struggle, you try, you submit online, you struggle. Again, you can print and submit a hard copy if that is possible, but sometimes you may find that that is not possible. And if it's not, again, remember those contact details, the competition manager, the contact person. Give them a call, drop them an email and tell them that you've been trying to submit online, but there's been an issue, and maybe they are even aware of it. They can let you know that there's been glitches, or maybe the challenge is on your side, and ask them whether there's an alternative way in which you can submit. If there are options, then you can find out. But then again, this can only happen if you make sure that you do not wait for the last minute. If you wait for the last minute, you're not going to have time, because you can send that email with a query. They might take 2 days to respond to you. That might be already too late if maybe you sent an email a day before the closing date, you see. And when you have been working on something for a very long time, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you end up not seeing errors and mistakes along the way. So make sure that you've got someone who can look at your work for you, someone who can proofread and might pick up some things that maybe you might have not seen. So it's always good. If it's your supervisor, you can ask your supervisor to read for you. A peer, a colleague, you can ask someone to read for you and check. And if maybe you want to send it for professional editing, again, often it may not be necessary because there isn't a lot in terms of writing. It's a 2-page, a half page. But if you feel that it will benefit from professional editing, of course, you can do that as well. Okay. Make certain that all required forms and signatures are included in your application. So if you are applying for funding, for external funding as a UNISA student, most, if not all funders, I don't know of any funder that external funder, especially for quite an extensive amount of money, who would accept an application that just comes from a student without the backing of the university. So make certain that all the required forms and signatures are included. So often they will require a recommendation or a signature approval of your supervisor on the application itself on the form, and sometimes the signature of the dean. If it's huge funding, often the money will be coming to UNISA and you'll be accessing the money via UNISA processes. Therefore, the institution itself then, by signing and approving and saying you can apply for this, also in some ways take responsibility to ensure that they will support you in this process of this project that you'll be doing. And if you are working or a part of a project with your supervisor, maybe the supervisor is the PI, the principal investigator, then also understanding your role as well. So the supervisor or the project leader might also involve you in the actual application process as well. If it's something that you're very interested in on how to write proposal, you see it as something that is going to be useful, beneficial for you, I would really encourage you to also have a conversation with your supervisors, tell them that you're interested in this. So when there are applications, that maybe you can also get some practice and work with them on it. Okay. Okay, so what are some of the common mistakes that we often make? Failing to allow enough time to submit via email or electronically. I've already mentioned this, and I've already mentioned what can happen when you do this. So make sure that you're allowed enough time. So these are some of the common mistakes that applicants do. And then not reading the application package in its entirety. Again, if you only just read parts and not all of the application call, you might miss certain things. Like I said, for example, where you include things in your budget that were stated very clearly in the application package that those things are not funded. Okay. And then not following formatting guidelines also. That is a common mistake that colleagues sometimes make, and immediately again the reviewers will just reject the application. And sometimes it is really such a pity, because you'll find that the actual idea, the project that you are introducing or are suggesting, are proposing, is something that is worth giving consideration to. But like I said, if someone is going to be giving a lot of money, they want to make sure that everything is in place. So even if maybe your project has got great potential, there can be little but detrimental things that you can make as mistakes that can lead to you not being able to get the funding that you require. And not getting required signatures. Remember, again, the deans or directors or supervisors can be very busy. If you leave things to the last minute, by the time you run around to go and check for signatures, they might be out of town, they might be at a conference, they might be at management meetings, they might not be available to sign for you. And if you submit without the required signatures, that's automatic rejection of your application. Okay. And then failing to proofread as well. Again, when work is clumsy, it takes away from the potential of what that work can actually do or provide. I have seen some dissertations and theses that some examiners have actually failed because they were not proofread. Of course, then, you know, we have a look at the work and see that as part of the reasons as to why the work was failed or why you did not get a distinction. So sometimes you'll end up just missing by a few marks. Proofreading or submitting work that is clumsy can be the difference between you just attaining your qualification or you attaining your qualification with a distinction. So it's that important. Okay. So some of the questions that colleagues have had in the past that they would ask related to grant writing. What is the deadline date? If you're looking at the call, that information would be there. If it's not clear, you are uncertain, you can always double check. Am I an eligible applicant? Look at the requirements and look at what it is that you can provide, what it is that you're suggesting. Is it in line with the requirements? That will assist you in determining whether you're eligible or not. And if you read the requirements and still a bit unsure, unclear, check with a colleague or write to the competition manager and say, I saw this call, it's in line with my work, I'm very interested in considering to apply for this funding. I just wanted to check whether I'm eligible to apply, some information about yourself and what you would want to do, and then they can immediately then tell you whether you should try or not. Can I sign the required forms? Yes, again, it depends whether it's online and electronic signature. Is it acceptable or not? Scanned copies acceptable or not? So what's required? So very, very important to double check that. Can I send some of the package after the deadline date? Definitely not. Unless there's been prior arrangement and approval given, which hardly ever happens, but unless if there's been some technical issues from the funder's side, maybe with the site, they can communicate that, but otherwise, no, you cannot send. Because sometimes you say, oh, I don't have some supporting documents, but let me submit what I have so that at least I meet their deadline of submission and they'll see that, no, I've submitted something. No, you don't have to submit something. You have to submit everything. The whole package is your application. If part of the package is not there, then it means your application is incomplete and therefore your application will not be considered. Okay, where do you go for additional questions? If there's a website, go to the website, read what's on the website, get more information. And if there's still some questions that you have, check the contact details. Like I said, contact the office of the funder and see if you can get information that you need. Will this grant be offered again next year? Again, you will check. When you read, you can see whether it's annually or it's offered once every 2 years or once every 3 years. That information will normally be there on the website. And if it's not clear, again, contact and find out. Will the deadline be extended? Again, unless if there are some unexpected glitches or issues, the deadline would usually not be extended because the deadline is in line with when the project is meant to begin and the reporting that is required and everything going forward in line with the funding period and all of that. So often it won't. Again, it can only happen under very special circumstances. What happens next after I submit my proposal? After you submit your proposal, you should get an acknowledgement letter that will give you some information acknowledging that your application has been received, and then of course informing you on when you can expect feedbacks. Sometimes that information is not available, but then you will wait for it. They'll often indicate that you should hear within 3 weeks or closing date is this time, and then the review process will happen during this time, and then feedback or the outcome to the applicants will be communicated by this date. So all of that is usually available online to make the process easier. So I thought I could quickly just show you an example that I found online of grant proposal. Again, here's a call for a proposal, for grant proposals. So the Infinity Foundation is calling for project proposals to do research or develop educational materials whose objective would be to improve authenticity of portrayal of Indic traditions in the educational system. So already there it's very specific that the objective of your work would be to improve the authenticity of portrayal of Indic traditions in the educational system. In what way? They go on to explain. So that's why it's important to read everything. So this project would result in one or the followings, and this is what would be expected. So as you're working on your proposal and your design, here it's one of the easy ones because the funder indicates what is it that they're expecting at the end. So are you going to write a book as a result of the work that you would have done? Are you going to come up with recalculation, some curriculum development linked to Indic traditions in the education system? Are you going to publish outputs, conferences, CD-ROMs, digital slide? So you see here the project would result in one or more. So you can choose one and then work on that and build on that. If you choose more, which ones are you going to choose? Are you going to develop a curriculum and attend a conference, present the results at a conference, and then maybe in line with that also produce audio video material? So what is it that you're going to do? So all of that will go into your proposal. Okay, and then the topics here around Indic, so you see here it's quite broad. It's around Indic traditions in the education system. So you can come at this from a philosophy perspective, from history perspective, from science, from sociology. So from a sociological perspective, Indic traditions in the educational system, this is how it is, this is what could change, this is how we can look up at it, what has been done from a psychological, sociological perspective when it comes to Indic transitions. So how can you come into this conversation? What would the focus of your project be? Right? And this is important. So the priority here, when you're talking about the priorities earlier, is that they want work that is going to respond to the growing concern over inaccurate and damaging Orientalist portrayals of India and India's cultural legacy. So if we're thinking about changing the narrative of India, its tradition, its history, its legacy in how it's portrayed in books, in the curriculum, how can we do work that brings about new ways, right? Another perspective of how we can engage with Indic traditions. Okay. So that's the overview, the background in terms of this call. And then, sorry, I'm just going to go back a little bit. And then they say that while the foundation will consider all proposals dealing with the authentic portrayal of Indic traditions more broadly, in particular, the foundation is interested in the following. And here again, you can see it's quite broad. So you may find your voice in one of these subtopics. So which one speaks to you? You zoom in on that, and then you develop it as part of your research proposal. So the compilation and development of works detailing the contributions of India to world civilization in math, science, and technology. So what does history tell us about India's contribution in these fields, right? And then again, here is another list, a long list of other potential issues that you can focus on as part of your research project, okay? And then we spoke about the selection criteria. So here's the selection criteria. All grant applications must include a CV highlighting your demonstrating your commitment to the topic area. And then what is required? A proposal, 2 to 5 pages in length, detailing what it is that you're going to accomplish, detailing the methodology, detailing the time that you're going to require for the project to be completed, and also detailing the budget, the funding that you're going to need. So remember when I was saying that you can structure your application according to the selection criteria, already here it's set out for you, right? So you're going to provide the background. What is it that's there? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? What methodology are you going to use? How long is this going to take? So what is it that you're going to do step by step? And then also the funding. What funding are you going to require, and what is the funding going to be used for? And then it gives information on the submission. That application should be submitted either by mail or fax to that to that address. And there's also phone numbers, so in case you've got questions, there you can call. And how you should submit your proposal as well. It should be marked grant proposal. Okay, so there you have it. And then the criteria in terms of what the reviewers are going to be looking at. It's very clear. So you must be a scholar, a teacher, visionary, spiritual leader. So it's very, very broad, like I said. They'll select recipients from people who submit completed applications. There'll be interviews or discussions as deemed appropriate if they want more information. Again, very rare. But this one looks like it's very open to following up in case something is not clear. Okay, so that was just an example of a very straightforward grant application. So just an idea of what it looks like. So I'm just going to quickly in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll open up for discussion. Going to also look at the logic model, and I've left it for last because I wanted you to see that the logic model is actually linked or in line with everything that I've just said right now. So the logic model is perceived by others, one of my colleagues, as the Swiss Army knife of the grant life cycle, right? So thinking about from the application process to putting together a proposal, to actually doing the work, embarking on the project itself, to the end of the project, looking at the outcomes of the project, the evaluation, what comes next, right? So that's the logic model. So how we think about the research project, or how we think about the grant life logically. Okay, so if you look at the Swiss Army knife, here you can see that it's one thing, but that serves multiple purposes. That can do many things, right? So a logic model is that it says you need to think about your project in its entirety. You need to think about your project from conceptualization, thinking about an idea, all the way to the outcome of the project. After you've put together a proposal, after you've applied for funding, secured the funding, after you've actually done the work, come out with results, and then move to actual outcomes that come as a result of the work that you've done. So all these multiple things that are interconnected, intertwined, right? That at face value, when you look at it, you won't think that it's one thing that has got so many things within itself, right? So what the logic model does is that it provides a clear framework that streamlines your proposal development and makes it easy for evaluators to understand, right? So your proposal development from the idea to saying, why is this important? Why is this a problem? Why is this a problem that requires attention? So the magnitude of the problem. And why do we need to give attention to it? And by us giving attention to it is going to require resources linked to money, resources linked to human beings. And therefore, I need a team of 7 or 8 people who are going to play these particular roles. I'm going to need these particular resources, instruments, equipment that are going to enable me to do all my tests and experimenting. All of these will then lead us to the result that will be the outcome the solution to the problem that I would have indicated at the beginning. And with that, we can then think about the way forward. We can think about the evaluation. We can think about what worked and what didn't, and think about what happens from there. Okay. So when you've outlined and you've put together your project or proposal in that way, it makes it easier for those who are going to evaluate your project to make sense of it, to understand it. That at the end, you are planning on having students graduating from this work, students who are going to have topics that are in line with the work that you're doing. So while you're doing the research, you're also producing knowledge in multiple ways through not only outputs in the form of articles, but also students who will graduate as well. So apology for the spelling error there. The logic model shows the relationships among the resources you have or the resources you need to operate your program, to actually go and do the project that you aim to do. It also shows the relationship between these resources also to the activities that you plan to do, as I've just said, and also the results that you hope to achieve. That's what the logic model is. All right. So part of the logic model, that there's inputs, right? So the resources consumed by the program, the resources required by the program to function, staff time. So staff in a sense of the collaborators, people that you're going to be working with, yourself, admin, research assistants, people are going to collect the data, people are going to transcribe the data, and thinking about the amount of time that's going to be required. So when you're thinking about inputs, these are all the things that you would think about that are required for the project to succeed, right? All the supplies, if you need data, if you need to print things, all of that, and the equipment also that you're going to require. So these are all the resources that are required by the program, by the project. So inputs, right? So these are things that you would explain in your proposal itself as it regards to input. So when it comes to a logic model, you would call that inputs. And then the activities. So now that the stuff is there, the equipment, what is it that you're going to do with them? Why are they required? What activities are you going to do? How, are you going to have focus groups? Are you going to be building things? Are you going to be, so what activities? What is it that your program is going to do? And what is it that you are hoping to do with the results at the end? So when you've gotten your data, when you've gotten the results of the experiments, are you going to just, are you going to create some prototypes? Are you going to experiment and actually build something? Are you going to then publish or present this work? So what activities are there at the end when you've done this work, right? And then the outputs. And again, this is where there's a slight difference between just doing the research project so that you can earn a qualification vis-a-vis doing a project so that a community, a society, a product is developed as a result. So there are measurable program activities that you may want to think about as part of your output. So describing outputs more broadly. So number of participants served. So as a result of this community will have processes in place that will assist towards the reduction of child malnutrition. So if we do this, if we put this in place, if we change this, if we revise that, if we do this, then at least 100 people or 1,000 people would benefit from this work that I've done, right? And then the outcomes, so the benefit of your program, obviously then as a result of this, and if we do this, or if we use this that I've come up with, then families will benefit, society will benefit, because we want there will be a reduction or an elimination of children who are dying from malnutrition. So that's the benefit that my program will bring as a result of these program activities. This is the outcome that we want. So if you come up with something like that, right, then it becomes clear and easier in some ways for the funder to be convinced that their work will actually respond to societal issues in very tangible ways. And then just lastly, I thought I'll just give you just a quick sample of what a logic model looks like. So when I was talking about inputs and outputs and the outcomes that you would have. So here's just a quick example, just to think about what this might look like in practice. And it's just part of a bigger study. The situation here is that during a country needs assessment, majority of parents reported that they were having difficulty parenting and felt stressed as a result. So you do your work, and the inputs is there. So staff, your researchers, everybody, there's funding, there's money, you're working with your collaborators, your partners, and then you conduct research, you do work that speaks to this situation that you're confronted with. And then based on the work that you've done, you come up and you develop a parent education curriculum, or parenting educational curriculum. Not sure how useful that is, but something that can be tested, whether there is a curriculum that can assist parents. Deliver a series of interactive sessions. These are outputs that you would then have as a result of the work that you would have done, the research. And then facilitate support groups for parents who feel stressed and overwhelmed. So these are the actual things that you would then do, practical, tangible things that you would do. And then this would be targeted at those parents who are struggling with parenting and are feeling stressed as a result of their struggles with parenting. So with these outputs, with this curriculum and interactive sessions and support groups, the outcomes would be that parents will have an increased knowledge of child development, right? So where sometimes they don't understand, why do teenagers behave the way they do? Why do children do this and that? So gaining some knowledge on this might better assist them to be able to know how to respond and engage with their children in a way that does not leave them feeling stressed because of this lack of understanding between parent and child. Parents will better understand their own parenting style as well and reflect on that. They'll gain skills in effective parenting. And based on this, they can, there's identification of appropriate actions to take. What is it that needs to change? What is it that can be done differently? And use effective parenting practices, which will hopefully then lessen the stress that they feel. And what would the outcome, the results be, is that we will then have improved child-parent relations, which will ultimately lead to strong families, right? So that's an example of how to think about a logic model. Okay, and with that, I shall pause and open up for questions and comments. Based on today's presentation. Okay, I'm going to check and see if we have any questions or comments. All right, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm not seeing any questions. I'll just give it a minute in case maybe you're still reflecting and thinking about it. So just give it a minute or two. And if there aren't any questions, that's also okay. It's either you understood everything, which is a good thing, Or you have not thought of any questions to ask yet? But the good thing is that we still have follow-up sessions on Wednesday and on Friday. So if, as you go back to reflect on today's session, you come up with certain questions or some things come up for you, then those can also be given attention on Wednesday. So at least there's still that opportunity as well. So if there aren't any questions today, it's not a train smash. We can revisit on Wednesday if there's anything linked to today's session that perhaps might come up on Wednesday that you might want to ask and follow up on. Okay, colleagues, I still don't see any questions. So I'm going to assume that there aren't any questions. That's a first. There aren't any questions. So in the absence of questions, I do not think therefore that I should keep you any longer. Depending on where you are, I'm going to wish you a very good night or good afternoon or good morning. So depending on which part of the world you are in, thank you so much for attending today's session. And I hope to see you on Wednesday as we continue on discussing grant writing. And on Wednesday, we'll be focusing on the actual steps and content of what we were talking about today. So the research design, what does that entail? What is the content? And again, you will see some of the correlations or some of the connections with your actual research projects. So for some of you, it might actually be useful as you're thinking about your literature, your introduction, if you're still thinking about that at this moment. But yeah, in terms of how that looks like in the context of grant writing and grant application. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And Hayuru, thank you for your comment. Okay, have a good night, everyone.